he's awesome, and he's my rabbi, so one of my rabbis at least. So I want to go over that. So what I want to do today is to review a little bit on the two atoms. Now, I'm just curious. Can you see me pointing this to the screen?
Yes.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And then go over Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik has amazing things to say on the problem of evil, and I think really instructive lessons for us in these days. So my goal is to get through those texts today. And I have them included here. It's the whole source sheet here. I'm just curious. Are you able to see? This too?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was my first time doing this. Okay, and it's like I've been doing this for a month, but it's my first time doing this. Okay. So again, here are our rabbis, but we're only going to be actually hitting 5 of 8 probably, and for the most part, 4 of 8. So we did what we could. We had a little bit of a break, and we got deeper into the other ones. We'll have to figure out if there'll be opportunity to learn about these others, Rav Shagar, Rav Mordechai Kaplan, Rav Zalman Schachter Shlomi. They're awesome. I had a feeling that you guys wouldn't connect so much to Rav Shagar, so I don't feel too bad about that. But anyway. Okay, so here we go. Last class, we talked about the two atoms. Anybody remember what we talked about in the lesson that we kind of try to take from it in relation to our situation right now? I'm going to make, just try to see if anybody's raising their hands here. Or anybody, if you're not raising your hand, just call out, I guess. Anybody remember what we talked about?
Atom 1 and atom 2.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it? Okay.
I'm trying to remember.
Okay, it's fine. All right, so I'll just summarize it for you. What?
One was the atom of creation, and the other, well, all right, I'll stick with that one.
The others can subdue the world.
Yes. Okay. So that's the first one. Okay. So let's do it. I'll explain it to you. And we talked about why it's important, why those two atoms are important. So I don't have the source sheet here. Maybe I do actually. Let's find that source sheet. Let's take a look at it for a second. You can see all my notes. For anybody who's never gone on this Google Drive, just so you know, this is what it looks like, and this is what I've been sending out every week.
We're only seeing the one sheet. We're not seeing what you're doing behind the curtain.
So are you seeing this?
No.
No, all we see is the sheet with Soloveitchik.
Okay, so let me just
the, you know.
That's interesting. Okay. All right, so let me go back to that then. This one you're seeing? Okay, you're seeing the sheet? Okay. I guess I didn't switch the screen. Okay, there's a way to do that. All right, so I won't go over that, but I'll just tell you outside. So Atom 1 and Atom 2, we talked about the biblical scholars say that 2 authors authored the 2 first chapters of Bereshit because they're so different from each other. We had a whole class on that. And the biblical scholars in general say there's multiple authors to the Bible. We want to say it's one God or one author. And Rav Soloveitchik wasn't worried by that because he said the 2 depictions of Adam would just differ on 4 different axes, depict 2 aspects of the individual. And that's a very powerful thing. Let me just mute everybody for a second. That's a very powerful thing because we all have 2 sides to us. We have a creative side. We have an active side, a side that's very pragmatic and is involved in the world, involved in business, involved in science, heeding science, and following it. That's one. That's Adam 1. Adam 2, which is depicted more in a spiritual sense, and the connection with Eve is different there. You have to really go over it. I'll send you the link again. We went over it in depth. I'll send you that if you want to review it. It's really good stuff. If you want to know something in Jewish philosophy, you should know about the 2. That's one of the things you should know, the 2 atoms in Rav Soloveitchik's life. If you don't know it, please review. It's a half-hour video. You can watch it in a half hour. So the second atom is a spiritual atom. And that's kind of like a aloof mystic who's thinking about all the depths of reality and the inner workings of why things happen. And Rav Soloveitchik says you need both of them. And not just that, the first atom, which is kind of like a modern person, that is the atom in relation to which the Torah says Adam was created in the image of God. So we said that's pretty amazing that we are created in the image of God, and that side of us that was created in the image of God embraces science, embraces the modern world, is trying to conquer. It talks about kivshua, conquer reality in relation to Adam 1. And so Soloveitchik says we have to embrace both of these personalities, and they're both sides of the individual. And we try to relate that. And there's a lot to be said about that in terms of Rav Soloveitchik's thought and bringing it more to the modern person and making space for modern outlook, modern reality, modern engagements, science. And so we talked about how both of these aspects should relate to us. This is like very beginning of our COVID-19 experience, where people were just trying to figure out what's going on. I was trying to push us to, on one hand, embrace science, which is Adam 1. On the other hand, try to find Adam 2 also. Okay, we're staying away from everybody. We're secluding ourselves. We're doing what we have to do. We're following science. On the other hand, what are we doing for our spiritual lives and our spiritual selves? How are we finding meaning and purpose in our reality? And I think that's still a challenge for us today. A lot of us are kind of like going crazy in our homes and everything. It's still important to find those times where you can nourish both of your sides. That was Adam 1, Adam 2. You should know about Adam 1 and 2 if you can. Look into that. What I want to talk about today, and this is also, we're going to relate it to our days, which I'm going to try to do that over the next few days, because I feel like if you give Divrei Torah today that aren't connected to the coronavirus, it's not saying it's not shticky, it's just not, it's not where people are. So I think it's important to try to relate Torah to where people are today. So we're going to talk today about Rav Soloveitchik's approach to evil, and that's encapsulated in this book. This is Fate and Destiny. It's apparently appearing opposite, but you get the idea. The other book was The Lonely Man of Faith. What are you saying, Mark?
Yours is flipped, so it looks opposite to you. We see it correct.
Okay, cool. Okay, so in this book he talks about, he wrote this after the Holocaust. He's trying to make sense of it all. And in this book, he really goes into his approach to evil and how we have to deal with it, again, in this dual way. That's one difference, okay? One difference between Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Kook all the time. Rav Kook is always looking for harmony. Rav Soloveitchik accepts that there's not always harmony in reality. Things don't always go well, and there's a lot of conflicts, and he embraces the conflict. It's a huge difference. Sometimes it's hard to read Rav Soloveitchik because you want a happy ending. You don't always get it. And that's connected to his way of looking at things. And that's more of a rationalistic approach as opposed to Rav Kook, which harmonizes things. That's more of a mystical approach. So here were a few mystical components that we highlighted in Rav Kook's thought. I'm on the shared screen here. Rav Kook always talked about a personal spiritual experience. I'm going to show you where Rav Soloveitchik differs on these different axes, okay, over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Personal spiritual experience, seeing Hashem in history. If you remember, we talked about Rav Kook. Rav Kook said, this is the redemption. I don't know I hope you remember that. We talked about how Rav Kook highlighted, he saw Herzl as a harbinger of the redemption. And he said he might have been a spark of the Messiah, the son of Joseph. He said, right now we're in redemption. We're in the redemption period. Rav Soloveitchik, he sees Rav Hashem working, but he doesn't so clearly see this as the redemption per se. We're going to see that next week, hopefully. In terms of spiritual experience, Rav Soloveitchik doesn't always talk from a spiritual place. He talks more from a Talmudic place, which deals with the intellect. A big difference between a rationalist and a spiritualist and a mystic. The rationalist defines everything in terms of how to intellectually. Rav Kook talks a lot from the personal experience and his emotions, although Rav Soloveitchik does have a lot of emotions too. Holistic approach. Again, that's what we talked about before. Rav Kook sees everything come together. Rav Soloveitchik does not. And lastly is the positive outlook on reality. Rav Soloveitchik is open to saying things aren't always positive. There's not always a happy ending. We're going to see that right now in relation to his approach to evil. I think his approach to evil and how we should deal with it is instructive, but it's also sobering. So let's get going with that right now. Let me just ask if there's any questions. Let's see. Or unmute everybody if I can. Give me a moment. Here it is. All right, I unmuted everybody. Are there any questions on anything we talked about so far?
So we're going to be talking about Rav Soloveitchik now.
Yes, we finished with Rav Kook in week 15, and we've been doing Rav Soloveitchik 16, 17, and 18. The 16th
Right.
week, we learned about him, his history, his background, and we learned about the 2 chapters in the book of Breshit.
Right.
We did that in the Tuvin Hall. Last week, we talked about the 2 Adams in The Lonely Man of Faith. And this week, we're talking about fate and destiny and Rav Soloveitchik's approach to evil and how we can learn from that in relation to everything that's going on around us. Is that helpful?
Yes, you've made it really clear. Thank you.
Okay, that's like my main goal. Okay, cool. So let's get going a little bit here with fate and destiny. Let me just mute everybody again. All right. So I'm really excited to introduce this to you. This is an awesome text. So if you just pay attention, this is page 3. I'll send you this source sheet also. Send you this to your email. We have, basically we're going to go over page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. This is up to page 9 in Fate and Destiny, okay? And I organized it here for you to make it a little bit easier to read together. That's like a little annoying. I can't scroll through it in the easiest way. Okay, that is what it is. I make it smaller. There we go. Is that too small for you to read? Too small for you to read. Okay.
Bifocals.
Better.
Much better.
Better.
I'm just joking. I know you guys are
Consider
That's
the elderly, please.
Those on the phone like have no clue what's going on. But we love you, and I'm just kind of showing them the screen.
Those
Okay,
on
here we
Zoom
go.
have no idea what's going on.
Even the host doesn't know what's going on. Okay, so here's Rav Soloveitchik, page 2, Fate and Destiny. He introduces 2 aspects. Again, Rav Soloveitchik doesn't always harmonize things. He defines things. This versus that. It's a very brisker. If you ever heard that word brisker, that's how people from the city of Brisk, that's how they learned Talmud. His grandfather was a huge Talmudist. He was always defining things. This versus that. That's how Rav Soloveitchik thinks too. So he provides 2 approaches to dealing with evil, and I'll already give you a little background on what they are. Fate versus destiny. This is over here, this introductory paragraph. I'll read this and I'll give you the introduction of what it is. Judaism in its strenuous endeavor to reach a safe shore, sound like even bigger, torn asunder by pain and affliction, in its search for an answer to the profound dilemma posed by the evil which apparently reigns unboundedly, arrived at a new formulation and definition of the problem, possessed of both depth and breadth. The problem of suffering, Judaism claims, may be raised in 2 distinct dimensions. This is Rav Soloveitchik's innovation, is the way he defines it. Fate and destiny. I never heard about these 2 aspects defined this way before I started reading Rav Soloveitchik's works. Judaism has always distinguished between an existence of fate and an existence of destiny, between the I subject to fate and the I endowed with destiny. It is in this distinction that our teaching regarding suffering is to be found. So already he's giving us a little hint to what he's talking about. Let's actually leave that open here. There are 2 ways when evil befalls the individual, and he's talking about post-Holocaust Judaism. When evil befalls the individual, they can either deal with it in one way, which is fate, meaning living in that tough experience, in the fate of what's going on, sometimes being bewildered and overwhelmed by it, sometimes trying to figure out what the heck's going on when it's all happening to the individual. I don't know if you've gone through this, but I've gone through those 2 stages. The first stage was, at least recently, when we got removed, exiled from our shul, and kind of everything switched up on us. You're just trying to figure out, you don't have energy to figure out what's going on. You're just completely overwhelmed by the new situation. You're locked in your home. You can't you can't only go out to the supermarket. Some of us can't even go there. So it's overwhelming. That's fate. Your fate is happening to you, and you don't know what to do with it. You are kind of like almost collapsing underneath it. The second stage is when you emerge a little bit from it. And that was I guess a few weeks ago, we're trying to emerge from the new fate and trying to make sense of it. We're not solving it. We're not necessarily proactive. It's still overwhelming. It's still our fate. But we're trying to make sense of what's going on around us. So that's this first approach, this first experience of evil is what he calls fate. And it has those 2 aspects, being overwhelmed and trying to make sense of it. So, and the next approach or next experience is destiny. So I want to go over fate with you first. So what is the nature of the existence of fate? It's an existence of compulsion, an existence of the type described by the Mishnah. Against your will do you live out your life. A purely factual existence, one link in a mechanical chain, devoid of meaning, direction, purpose, but subject to the forces of the environment into which the individual has been cast by providence, without any prior consultation. So if I relate this to his days, he's talking about post-Holocaust. People are just trying to just figure out what has happened. It felt like Hashem left them. Family members died. Judaism, they don't know what will be the future of Judaism. Just trying to even survive and swim amidst all the raging waters around them. If you go a little bit towards our situation, which is completely different, but still, it's still dealing with uncomfortable and almost like an evil reality, where you're just overwhelmed. You're trying to figure out what's going on. No one consulted us about this. It's just all of a sudden we got kicked out of all of our public spaces. So he is fashioned by his passive encounter with an objective external environment. All this stuff's going on around us, and we're passive. The eye of fate is caught up in a blind, wholly external dynamic. Let me see. Can you read this other side of the page too?
You can move it.
What?
Make it a little bit smaller.
Okay. You can see it now?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Being empty, lacking any inwardness, any independence, any selfhood. Indeed, an eye of fate is a contradiction in terms. For how can eye awareness and selfhood coexist with pure externality and object-like being? Meaning, this thing's happening to me, and I don't really exist. I'm just in shock, overwhelmed, and don't know what to do with it. So that's the first. Is against this background, the experience of evil arises in all its terror. There are two stages to the fate-laden experience of evil. So that's what we discussed. The first stage is this. The man, the object, bound in the chains of an existence of compulsion, stands perplexed and confused before that great mystery, suffering. Fate mocks him, his being, shattered and torn, contradicts itself, and negates its own value and worth. So he keeps going on into this. I'll tell you, his afflictions appear shadowy, murky, satanic forces, this offspring of the chaos and the void which pollute the cosmos that have been destined to be clearly reflect the image of its creator. So he goes on. Basically, you're perplexed, you're overwhelmed. The next stage of fate, we're not even in destiny yet. Stage has two stages. Fate has two stages, A and B. B is you're seeking to figure out what's going on. After the psychic upheaval of the sufferer, this is part B, the immediate reaction of evil has passed. There follows the intellectual curiosity, which endeavors to understand the cosmos and thereby undergird man's confidence and security. Right? We're trying to figure out what's going on. How do we make sense of it? How do we get control of it? What's God doing? And what do we do with it? So in this stage, a person begins to contemplate suffering and suppose, so I'm just going to move this screen, and to pose grave and difficult questions. Right? Why is this happening to me? What's God doing? He tracks the intellectual foundations of suffering and evil and seeks to find the harmony and balance between the affirmation and negation, and to blunt the sharp edge of the tension between the thesis, the good, and the antithesis, the bad, in existence. Hello, this is Rav Kook. If you were with me for like 4 classes in a row, Rav Kook says evil isn't necessarily evil. Those who are secular in the land of Israel, who are fighting against Judaism and religion, they're really bringing the redemption. All the things that are bad, we can harmonize it and make it look better. Rav Soloveitchik, you're going to see, he's not so fond of that. He's more of a rationalist in the sense that he accepts reality for what it is. He sees it for what it is. He doesn't try to blur it with mystical explanations. So this is already an entryway into the difference between Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Kook. So here he goes. Now, when this man of fate, or this woman of fate, gets to the stage where they're trying to understand reality, Rav Soloveitchik says they don't come up with an answer. That's big. Rabbis throughout all the generations want to provide an answer. Rav Soloveitchik doesn't do that. That's daring, and we're going to see he provides an avenue for dealing with evil, but not through understanding it. So this is big today because Rav Kook, not Rav Kook, our own Rav Kook, Rabbi Wahlberg, in his Parsha previews this last week, he asked, why did coronavirus happen to us? I don't know if you saw it. Anybody see it? Raise your hand if you did.
Yeah.
Okay. see anybody else here. Okay, so Rav Kook,
All right.
Rabbi Wahlberg in his Parsha preview said we can't understand it, but he brought a lot of examples of people who do think they understand it. Rabbi Wahlberg happened to have studied under a certain rabbi, Rabbi Soloveitchik. Okay, I don't think, and I'm like, me as an academic, I'm trying to analyze people. If I were to write an essay on Rabbi Wahlberg, maybe I would highlight the fact that he started his education in a more of a rationalist seminary with Rav Soloveitchik as his teacher. And this approach of not knowing the reason is very Soloveitchikian. Okay, so it's always interesting to find out like how things work in the procession of thought. So here's where Rav Soloveitchik tells us that we can't really understand it. Next week, I guess, we'll go into the destiny, but I'll give you a little touch of it so we don't leave depressed. Okay, so here is when he says, so Judaism, so he goes into, can we really understand what's happening? Judaism, with its realistic approach to man and his place in the world, understood that evil cannot be blurred or camouflaged. Rav Kook would say, that's nonsense. We should camouflage it. And that any attempt to downplay the extent of the contradiction and fragmentation to be found in reality will neither endow man with tranquility nor enable him to grasp as essential mystery. Evil is an undeniable fact, meaning that's very different than Rav Kook. Evil is, things are bad. The coronavirus, it's bad. It's real. And it sucks. I mean, I have to say like as a rabbi, but it does. There is evil. There is suffering. There are hellish torments in the world. We're not going to cover up and say, oh, don't worry about it. This is an opportunity to become more spiritual. No, things are bad. People are dying. We're not going to lie to ourselves. There is suffering. Whoever wishes to delude himself or herself by diverting his attention from the deep fissure in reality by romanticizing human existence is not but a fool and a fantast. So I've never used that word fantast, but you know what it means. It is impossible to overcome the hideousness of evil through philosophical speculative thought. Judaism determined that man, entrapped in the depths of a frozen fate-laden existence, will seek in vain for the solution to the problem of evil within the framework of speculative thought, for he will never find it. This is exactly Rabbi Wahlberg's Dvar Torah over Shabbos. You're going to seek in vain to find the answer. You have to be quiet, Rabbi Wahlberg said. Hello, this is Rav Soloveitchik. Certainly the testimony of the Torah that the cosmos is very good is true. Second. Affirmation may be only from the infinite perspective of the Creator. So he's going to say that from God's side, God knows what's going on, but we don't. So I want to skip a little bit now. So that's kind of like what he said. He says it like this. So God understands what's going on. It's like, but the person won't understand. It's like gazing at a beautiful rug, a true work of art onto which an exquisite design has been woven, but looking at it from its reverse side. Can such a viewing give rise to a sublime aesthetic experience? We, alas, view the world from its reverse side. We can't understand anything. We are therefore unable to grasp the all-encompassing framework of being. And it's only within that framework that it is possible to discern the divine plan, the essential nature of the divine actions. So the person, the man of faith, the first stage of dealing with evil, someone's overwhelmed. They try to seek to understand, but they can't understand. It's a hard reality, but it's real. And Rav Soloveitchik doesn't cover over that reality. The next person, and we're not going to have so much time to go into that today, we'll go into that next week, but this I can already give you like a little taste of it, is the person of destiny. So let's read a little bit of this, and then we'll go over this next week, but I don't want to leave you kind of just like tense and not knowing what Rav Soloveitchik will tell you what Rav Soloveitchik will instruct you to do now. So here it is. In the second dimension of human existence, destiny, the problem of suffering assumes a new form. What is the nature of existence of destiny? It is an active mode of existence, one where a man confronts the environment into which he was thrown, possessed of an understanding of his uniqueness, of his special worth, of his freedom, and of his ability to struggle with his external circumstances without forfeiting either his independence or selfhood. So here he says here, and I'm skipping here to this sentence, which is key to Rav Soloveitchik's presentation of the man of destiny. Man's task in the world, according to Judaism, is to transform fate into his destiny. A passive existence into an active existence. An existence of compulsion, perplexity, and muteness. That's Rabbi Wahlberg's muteness from Shabbat. Into an existence replete with a powerful will, with resourcefulness, daring, and imagination. Basically, and this is the line that I want you to remember, we'll go over this next week. He says, where where is it? Here. If a person allows his pains to wander about, here. If a person allows his pains, which is the experience of fate, to wander about the vast empty spaces of the cosmos like blind, purposeless forces, then a grave indictment is drawn up against him for having frittered away his suffering. Basically, Rav Soloveitchik says the person at destiny accepts that they can't understand evil. But they say, what do I do now with the suffering? What do I make of it? I can't understand it. But pragmatically, what do I do with it? And Rav Soloveitchik says, we're to be very careful not to waste our suffering. It's a crazy statement. But basically, making good from what we have, not because it's good, it's bad, but trying to find positive avenues for growth within it. So I like this approach because it's not lying to ourselves. Things are bad. It's being real. That's a realist. That's a rationalist approach. On the other hand, it's very pragmatic. What do you do with it? It's focused on from now forward. It's not from now backwards. It's not from now upwards. It's from now forwards. And that's, I think, really important for us to focus on. What do we do from now forwards? What kind of things can we do to grow now with the reality we've been thrown into? How can we find moments to reflect? What can we make? How best can we maximize this reality for our own spiritual growth? Everyone has their own personal answers. I'll just share like one or two that I've been doing, and then we'll conclude and move on and return next week. One thing I've been doing is I've been taking advantage of the hours where sometimes we're at shul because I daven earlier on Shabbos. I go for a walk at that hour. And for me, I try to turn that into a spiritual experience. When I'm walking, I never actually really look at the trees or at houses or appreciate the birds. I don't have time for that. On Shabbos, I do. Now, again, you might not want to leave your house, but I walk like up and down my street, but it could be in your backyard. It could be looking out your window. There's a lot of sanctity in that, and there's a lot of like serenity that you can find in nature. That's just like one thing I've been doing. Another thing that I've been exploring is singing. So on Shabbos, I've been singing the Shabbos songs, even though I'm by myself and it sounds crazy, and my neighbor like knocks on the door and they say, tell me to be quiet. That doesn't really happen. Maybe they're thinking that, I don't know. But like I try to find moments to sing, and truth be told, and I'll just say this, I extend my singing much longer than I actually would in shul. I've been experimenting with that. So those are just ways to not waste the suffering. There's suffering going on, but trying to not even make sense of it, make use of it. And it could be like, there's so many, another one is, and I've been doing this too, I don't have time to learn from rabbis. I'm always the rabbi. So I've been finding like all these lectures online on YouTube. My favorite rabbis from my past, from my yeshiva from 20 years ago, they look much older now. But I've been like listening to their classes. There's so many Zoom opportunities. I'm just bringing you 3 examples. But really, it's important to try to think of your own. Don't like Rav Soloveitchik's words, don't waste this reality. Try to find ways to maximize it and grow while you're, again, still making space for Adam 1, which is respecting what the doctors say and trying to follow the guidance of the scientists. So that's just a little bit to think about for this week. It's going to bring us back here and unmute us.